The alien palace shimmered under the twin suns, its walls reflecting light like liquid crystal. Inside, the air was tense, vibrating with anticipation. The day had begun like any other. Ceremonial guards pacing in perfect patterns, courtiers moving silently through the corridors, and the alien queen preparing for her morning audience. No one had expected what was coming. It started with a tremor in the outer halls, subtle at first. A faint vibration ran through the floor beneath the queen's feet. She paused, frowning. Her advisors, elegant and sharp-eyed, hesitated as well. The tremor grew into a rhythm, irregular and alarming, and then came the distant sound of shouts and metal crashing. The palace's outer gates were under attack. The elite guards, tall and muscular with glistening armor, were the first to react. They moved quickly, but instead of forming defensive lines, panic spread among them. Weapons that had never failed in training jammed inexplicably. Shields flickered and failed. Some guards muttered curses, others ran for safer corridors, abandoning their posts. The queen froze, her eyes scanning the chaos. She had always trusted her guards implicitly. They were bred to be loyal, trained for generations to defend the crown with their lives. Yet now, one by one, they fled, leaving hallways empty where they should have been strongest. Only one figure remained. The human advisor, a man who had served in the palace for several cycles, moved with calm precision. Unlike the panicking guards, he didn't shout orders or rush blindly. He assessed the situation, noting each weakness the attackers exploited and predicting their next moves. The queen watched, her mind struggling to comprehend his composure. He began sealing doors, dragging fallen barriers into place. Small, improvised defenses formed quickly under his hands. Where the palace guards had faltered, the human acted. He had no elite armor or alien enhancements, only determination, quick thinking, and a sense of duty that seemed almost unnatural to the queen. "Why does he stay?" One of her remaining attendants whispered, fear and disbelief in their voice. "Why does he not run?" He had chosen to protect her when everyone else had chosen survival. The attackers were not like any threat the palace had faced before. They carried technology scavenged from distant planets, stolen weapons the palace defenses had not been designed to counter. Pulses of energy erupted down the hallways, cutting through walls and neutralizing traps. Where guards should have held, corridors now lay open, exposed. The human moved like a shadow, using the environment to his advantage. He dragged a heavy console in front of a door and set it to overload, creating a flash that stunned the first wave of intruders. When the attackers recovered, he was already behind them, setting another trap. His movements were fluid, almost instinctive, a blend of intelligence and daring that no alien could match. The queen followed him cautiously, unsure whether to order him to retreat or to stay by his side. She realized quickly that he was teaching her as much as defending her. He pointed to weaknesses in the architecture, instructed where to move to avoid danger, and explained, in calm tones, how to observe rather than panic. She listened, absorbing every word. At one point, a massive brute of an alien intruder broke through a secondary barrier. The human faced it without hesitation. Using a combination of leverage, timing, and the intruder's own momentum, he toppled the creature into a corridor, leaving it incapacitated but unharmed. The queen could not believe her eyes. A single human without enhanced strength or alien instincts could outmaneuver a trained combatant twice his size. Time seemed to stretch. The palace, once alive with activity, was now a battleground. Shattered decorations, scorched walls, and fallen guards littered the corridors. Yet through it all, the human remained a constant presence, calm, vigilant, and unwavering. The queen's advisors were beginning to understand what they had overlooked. Humanity, they realized, was not fragile. It was not slow or weak. It was clever, persistent, and willing to face danger when others would run. While her own species had fled, leaving her exposed, this human stayed, and in doing so had changed the balance of the fight. A sudden explosion rocked the palace. Dust and debris filled the air, and a section of the hallway collapsed. The queen stumbled, but the human was there in an instant, steadying her. "We move through here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Follow me." She had seen courage before, but this was different. It was intelligence and bravery combined in a single, unwavering spirit. In one hall, they encountered a group of attackers advancing silently, hoping to catch any defenders off guard. The human gestured to the queen, showing her how to use the shadows and broken columns to their advantage. He moved first, drawing attention, then ducked behind cover, luring the attackers into a trap he had prepared moments before. When the attackers stepped into the corridor, Automated panels surged with energy, knocking them back. The queen could not suppress a small, awed smile. He was teaching her without words, demonstrating that staying calm and thinking strategically could turn even a desperate situation into an advantage. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. The passage of time was meaningless amid the chaos. Every corner brought a new threat, every hallway a potential trap. And yet, with every challenge, the human adapted, finding solutions where none seemed possible. He barricaded doors, rigged traps, and guided the queen through paths the attackers would never anticipate. The palace, once a symbol of alien perfection and unbreakable order, now depended on a human's courage and ingenuity. And slowly, the queen began to see a truth she had never admitted before. Perhaps humans were not just newcomers in the galaxy. Perhaps they were something more. By evening, the initial wave of attackers had been slowed, disoriented, and forced to retreat temporarily. The palace was battered but not broken. The human, despite exhaustion and minor injuries, had maintained every defensive line, held every critical point, and ensured the queen remained safe. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but filled with awe. "Why do you do this?" Instead, she found loyalty, courage, and an instinctive understanding of duty that surpassed anything she had ever known. Her mind raced with thoughts about her species, her people, and the humans she had underestimated. In that moment, the queen realized that the human was not just protecting her physically. He was showing her a new way to see the galaxy. Humanity, she understood, had a power beyond weapons and technology. They had resilience, intelligence, and the ability to choose courage when all else fled. Night fell over the shattered palace, the twin suns dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the broken halls. The human, still alert, set new defenses for the hours to come. The queen, standing beside him, felt a surge of respect and trust that she could not ignore. The battle was far from over, but the first wave had been held at bay. And in the quiet after the chaos, one truth remained undeniable. When the guards fled, the human stayed. And that choice, simple as it seemed, would change everything. The night was thick, but the palace was not silent. Shadows moved along the walls, flickering in the light of damaged energy panels. The attackers had not given up. Their retreat was only temporary. Somewhere deep in the outer halls, metallic footsteps echoed, a warning that they would return. The human, though tired, did not falter. He adjusted the barricades he had set, checking each one carefully, ensuring they would hold for as long as needed. The alien queen followed closely, her mind still reeling from what she had witnessed earlier. Humans, she realized, were unlike any other species she had encountered. While her own guards had fled, panicked, and unthinking, the human had stayed, not because of obligation, but because he understood the value of courage and responsibility. Watching him act had opened a new perspective, one that challenged everything she had assumed about strength and loyalty. "Your species is remarkable," she said softly, almost to herself. "I did not expect such resolve." "You saw that today." From the shadows, small squads moved silently, testing the palace defenses, looking for weaknesses. The human anticipated their movements, reading their patterns and setting traps before they reached critical points. He rigged energy conduits to redirect power into the floors and walls, turning the palace architecture into a weapon. The queen followed his lead, learning to move like he did. She had never trained for combat, never needed to, yet he guided her with patient instructions. She observed, absorbed, and acted, realizing that survival sometimes demanded more than obedience. It required learning, adaptation, and courage in the face of fear. At one junction, an attacker crept toward them, undetected. The human noticed first, raising a hand to signal the queen to stay silent. He grabbed a loose panel, swinging it with precise timing. The intruder fell back, stunned but unharmed, and the queen realized how clever improvisation could be more effective than raw strength. "You see, panic never works," he whispered. "Predict, plan, act, that is how humans survive." They trained for perfection, assuming it would always protect them. Yet here was one human, without enhancements or centuries of ritual, holding a palace alone. She began to understand a truth that frightened and inspired her at once. Humans were unpredictable, resourceful, and willing to act where others would hesitate. Hours passed as the palace settled into an uneasy calm. The attackers had not vanished. They were regrouping, likely planning a more coordinated assault. The human used this time to reinforce barriers, set alarms, and prepare defensive strategies. He explained each measure to the queen, not as lessons, but as shared actions. She began to feel a growing respect, a bond forged in survival. At one point, the human paused and looked at her. "You could have left," he said. "Your guards abandoned you. You could have escaped while I held the line." "Someone has to stand." As night deepened, the attackers struck again, more forceful this time. From the corridors, energy blasts ripped through walls, shattering panels and sending sparks into the air. The human moved quickly, guiding the queen through alternative paths, using shadows and debris as cover. He led them into a side corridor, barricading it behind them just as a squad of intruders passed moments later. "You think too small," he muttered under his breath, adjusting a loose panel. "They expect fear, hesitation, confusion. Give them none of it." Each small victory, each clever maneuver, strengthened her belief that humans possess something extraordinary, the courage to remain, even when all seemed lost. The attackers regrouped once more, this time with larger numbers and heavier weapons. The palace corridors, once smooth and pristine, had become a battlefield. Sparks flew, walls cracked, and the sound of energy clashes echoed endlessly. Yet the human did not falter. He coordinated traps, rerouted energy, and lured intruders into dead ends. His mind was a machine of logic and instinct, unshaken by fear. At one critical moment, an intruder broke through a weakened barrier, heading straight toward the queen. Without hesitation, the human threw himself in front of her, blocking the path with his body and a nearby console. The attacker stumbled back, surprised, and the human rolled aside, pulling the queen to safety. The moment passed in seconds, but the impact was profound. She saw fully now that he would not abandon her, that his choice to stay was absolute. "Why are you not afraid?" she asked, breathless. "Fear is natural," he replied, adjusting a damaged panel. "But letting it control you, that is death. You face what you must and you act. That is what humans do." Instead, she felt a growing sense of understanding, as if a door had opened in her mind. She saw the value of courage combined with intelligence, of instinct shaped by experience, and of the willingness to remain when others fled. By the early hours of morning, the attackers had been repelled again, though at a heavy cost. Parts of the palace lay in ruin, corridors were blocked, and energy systems flickered dangerously. The human, exhausted and bleeding from minor wounds, checked every barricade and trap. His determination was tireless, driven not by duty alone, but by a choice to protect life when all else seemed lost. The queen finally spoke, her voice stronger, steadier. "You have saved this palace, perhaps even my life, but I do not understand fully. Why would a human risk so much for someone else?" Her guards had fled, her defenses had nearly failed, and yet this human had held every critical point, kept her safe, and taught her to act. In that moment, she began to see humanity in a new light, not as fragile newcomers, but as a species with a strength that transcended mere physicality. The twin suns began to rise, casting pale light over the shattered palace. The human adjusted his stance, scanning the corridors, ever vigilant. The queen stood beside him, her heart steady, mind alert, and spirit strengthened. She realized something profound. The first wave of attackers had been only a test, a demonstration of what courage and intelligence could achieve together. When the next wave came, she would be ready. And this time, she would act alongside the human who had taught her that standing firm and facing fear could change everything. Because when the guards fled, the human stayed, and in that choice, the fate of the palace and perhaps the entire world had begun to turn. The morning light crept through the shattered windows of the palace, illuminating walls scorched by energy blasts and corridors littered with debris. The first wave of attackers had retreated, but the queen knew it was only temporary. She could feel the tension thickening, the silent threat growing stronger with each passing moment. The human moved among the wreckage like a shadow, checking barricades, repositioning traps, and scanning every hallway for signs of intrusion. The queen followed him, learning more with each step. She had never imagined survival could be so deliberate, so calculated. Her guards had relied on strength and training, but the human relied on observation, anticipation, and ingenuity. He had turned the palace into a maze of defenses, using every corner, every wall, every obstacle to their advantage. "Humans survive differently," he said quietly, noticing her gaze. "We cannot rely on numbers or brute force. We plan, we adapt, we take risks when necessary. That is why I am still here." They advanced with heavier weapons, determined to break through the palace defenses. This time, they moved in coordinated groups, scanning each corridor with disciplined precision. The human had anticipated their return. He led the queen through hidden passages, carefully avoiding detection while setting new traps and distractions to slow them down. As they moved, the queen noticed something extraordinary. Where her guards had relied on rituals and numbers, the human relied on creativity. He used small panels to create temporary barriers, redirected energy conduits to confuse the attackers, and even employed reflective surfaces to mislead them about the queen's location. Every action was deliberate, every choice measured to maximize effect while minimizing risk. A squad of attackers approached a critical junction, unaware of the traps that awaited them. The human moved swiftly, pulling levers and pressing panels in sequence. A section of the floor emitted a pulse of energy that forced the attackers back, disarming them and blocking their path. The queen watched in awe. She had seen many defenders in her lifetime, but she had never witnessed such precision, such calm under pressure. "You think too small," he muttered, adjusting a fallen panel. "They expect fear, hesitation, and confusion. Give them none of it." Her own guards had been trained to fight, but not to think on their feet when everything went wrong. Humans, by contrast, had evolved to improvise, to act decisively when the odds were against them. That ability, she understood, was more valuable than any weapon or shield. The attackers regrouped, changing their strategy. They began probing the palace more cautiously, aware now that their previous tactics had failed. The human anticipated this as well. He created diversions, using light and sound to mislead them, and positioned the queen in safer areas. She followed his guidance, learning how to move, when to hide, and how to act without panic. Hours passed in a tense rhythm of anticipation and reaction. The queen noticed the human never stopped, never hesitated. Even when small injuries slowed him, he adjusted, finding new ways to hold the line. His endurance was remarkable, not because he was physically stronger than her guards, but because he understood the importance of persistence, of holding on when others would let go. At one point, they reached a collapsed corridor. Debris blocked the path, and a group of attackers was moving toward them from the other side. The human evaluated the situation quickly. He directed the queen to a narrow side passage, then used a combination of panels and energy conduits to create a trap. When the attackers entered, they were forced to retreat, confused and frustrated. The queen followed, keeping pace despite her growing fatigue. She had never been in such a situation before, and yet she felt a strange confidence. With the human leading with his careful instructions and fearless example, she realized she could survive. She could act. She could fight in her own way, using intelligence and observation rather than strength alone. "Why do you do this?" she asked quietly as they paused to catch their breath. "Because someone has to," he replied, adjusting a loose panel. "Someone has to hold the line when fear spreads. Someone has to make the hard choice. That is what humans do." The human, by contrast, had chosen action over fear. He had chosen to protect her, the palace, and the people inside. That choice, simple as it seemed, was more powerful than any weapon. The next attack came swiftly. This time, the attackers moved with precision, aiming directly for the queen. The human moved to intercept, positioning himself between her and the threat. Using a combination of agility and quick thinking, he forced the attackers into a narrow corridor, where traps he had set earlier immobilized them. He then guided the queen through a secondary passage, ensuring her safety. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of trust. She had never doubted the human's skill, but now she understood the depth of his commitment. He had chosen to stay, to face danger, to act when others would have run. That choice was more than courage. It was a lesson in responsibility, loyalty, and determination. As the sun rose higher, casting light on the battered palace, the human paused to catch his breath. The queen stood beside him, surveying the damage. The corridors were wrecked, the walls scorched, and debris littered every path. Yet the human remained vigilant, checking every barricade, ensuring no gap went unnoticed. "You could have left," the queen said softly. "Your species does not belong here. You could have saved yourself." Someone has to choose action over fear. The attackers made their final move of the morning, striking with greater force. The human and the queen moved together, using every trap, every hidden path, every strategy to hold them at bay. The battle was exhausting, each corridor a test of endurance and skill. Yet with each successful defense, the queen felt a growing confidence, a recognition that she could survive alongside this human, that she could learn from him and act in concert with him. By midday, the attackers had been forced to retreat once again. The palace stood, battered but unbroken, a testament to strategy, intelligence, and courage. The human, though exhausted, checked every trap, every barricade, and every corridor one last time. He was a sentinel, unwavering, unbroken, a living example of what humans could achieve when they chose to stay. The queen looked at him, admiration and gratitude filling her thoughts. "You have taught me more than I could have imagined," she said. "Not just about survival, but about courage, intelligence, and loyalty. My guards fled, yet you stood." Her palace had been threatened, her guards had fled, and yet she had survived. Not because of power or tradition, but because of one human who had chosen to act when others would not. She understood now that humanity's strength was not just in technology or numbers, but in courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to face fear head-on. As the sun climbed higher, the human and the queen moved through the palace together, reinforcing defenses and preparing for the inevitable next assault. Each step was deliberate, each action purposeful. The palace was no longer just a building. It was a living testament to intelligence, courage, and the choice to stand when all else had fallen. The queen knew that the coming days would test them further. The attackers would return, stronger and more determined. Yet she felt a newfound strength, a bond with the human who had taught her the value of perseverance. She realized that she could survive, that her people could survive, and that the galaxy had yet to see the full measure of humanity's potential. Because when the guards fled, the humans stayed. And in that choice, the fate of the palace, and perhaps the entire world, had begun to shift. The palace had endured countless assaults, but the calm after the morning's battle was deceptive. The queen knew that the attackers were regrouping. Their earlier failures would only make them more determined. From the shattered windows, she could see distant flashes where reinforcements gathered. The human moved among the corridors, checking barricades, inspecting traps, and preparing for what he knew would be the ultimate test. "Today they will not retreat," he said quietly, his voice steady despite exhaustion. "They will come with everything they have. We must be ready." She had come to trust his judgment completely. In the hours she had spent beside him, she had learned more about courage, strategy, and survival than she ever had in all her years of rule. Her guards had abandoned her, but this human had not. He had stood when everyone else fled, and now, together, they would face the final assault. The first signs of the attackers' return appeared in the distance. Energy blasts lit up the horizon as squadrons moved closer, their weapons designed to overwhelm any defense. The human adjusted panels and conduits, checking every trap one last time. Each corridor, each hallway, had been reinforced with a careful mix of ingenuity and improvisation. The palace, once a symbol of opulence and order, had become a labyrinth of defense, alive with strategy and preparation. The queen followed him, her heart steady, her mind focused. She had learned to move with purpose, to observe before acting, and to rely on intelligence as much as instinct. Together, they were no longer just defender and protector. They were a team, each learning from the other, each complementing the other's strengths. The attackers struck with unprecedented force. From every direction they moved, attempting to breach the palace defenses simultaneously. Energy blasts tore through walls, sending sparks and debris flying. The human reacted instantly, guiding the queen through hidden passages, luring attackers into traps, and using the environment to their advantage. Every move was calculated, precise, and effective. In one corridor, a group of attackers broke through a barricade, advancing toward the queen. The human stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the intruders. Using a combination of agility, timing, and clever maneuvering, he forced the attackers into a narrow passage where traps immobilized them. The queen watched in awe. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, he remained calm, decisive, and unbroken. "Stay close," he instructed, glancing at her. "Follow my lead and do not hesitate." Her confidence had grown, but she knew she still relied on his experience and quick thinking. Every step was a lesson, every action a demonstration of the human ability to remain steadfast when all others would falter. The attackers regrouped again, this time sending a massive squad through the main entrance. Their weapons were more powerful, their coordination tighter. The palace shook as energy blasts tore through walls and floors, yet the human did not falter. He moved with precision, setting new traps, redirecting energy conduits, and using the palace itself as a weapon. The queen realized that his strength was not just in his actions, but in his mind. He anticipated the attackers' movements, predicted their strategy, and used creativity and intelligence to outmatch them. Where brute force had failed, cunning and quick thinking prevailed. At one point, the human was struck by a glancing blow, sending him stumbling against a wall. Pain etched his face, but he did not stop. He adjusted a trap with one hand and guided the queen through a narrow passage with the other. She saw clearly that fear and pain had no power over him, that his will was stronger than any weapon. "You will fall if you hesitate," he said, his voice low but firm. "Act, or the palace falls. Move now." Together, they turned the palace into a fortress, using every corridor, every wall, every obstacle to hold back the attackers. Energy panels sparked, walls cracked, and debris flew, but the human adapted, turning every hazard into an advantage. Hours passed in a blur of action and strategy. The attackers were relentless, but so were they. The queen noticed a change in herself. She was no longer a passive ruler. She was an active participant in the defense. She moved with purpose, observed with clarity, and acted with intelligence. And always beside her, the human remained, unwavering and fearless. Finally, the attackers made a desperate push for the throne chamber. The human saw it coming and acted immediately. He positioned himself at the entrance, setting traps and preparing for the final stand. The queen watched as he moved with incredible speed and precision, guiding intruders into dead ends, blocking pathways, and using the palace itself as a weapon. When the first attacker reached the chamber, the human intercepted him directly. Using his body and the environment, he forced the intruder back, buying the queen precious seconds. She realized that he was not just defending her physically, he was defending hope, morale, and the possibility of survival. His courage inspired her, strengthened her resolve, and gave her the confidence to act decisively. The final wave was upon them. The attackers moved with coordinated precision, aiming to overwhelm every defense. The human and the queen worked in perfect unison, using every trap, every passage, every advantage they had prepared. The battle was intense, exhausting, and relentless. Yet through it all, the human remained a constant presence, a pillar of strength and determination. At one point, the queen saw an opportunity. A narrow corridor led directly to the attacker's command squad. The human nodded subtly, signaling her to take action. Together, they moved quickly, using their knowledge of the palace and the traps they had set to disorient and disable the enemy. The attackers faltered, confused and frustrated by the human's ingenuity. The queen realized fully now what she had learned. Humans were not merely survivors. They were thinkers, planners, and doers. They could turn desperation into strategy, fear into action, and chaos into order. And in the human standing beside her, she had seen the ultimate example of these qualities. As the sun began to set, the attackers finally began to retreat. Their forces were broken, their strategy foiled, and their morale shattered. The palace had endured, battered but unbroken. The human stood in the throne chamber, breathing heavily, wounds minor but present, his eyes scanning every corridor to ensure no threat remained. The queen approached him, her expression filled with admiration and gratitude. "You have done what no one else could," she said softly. "My guards fled, my palace was under siege, yet you held everything together." She had witnessed courage before, but this was different. This was choice, determination, and intelligence combined. She realized that humanity's strength was not measured by numbers or weapons, but by the willingness to act when others would not, to face danger without hesitation, and to protect others despite the risk. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "You have taught me more than any lesson, any ceremony, any guard ever could. You have shown me the meaning of courage, loyalty, and the power of choice." Her palace had survived, her people had hope, and the attackers had been defeated. But most importantly, she had witnessed a truth that would forever change her understanding of humanity. They were not just another species in the galaxy. They were capable of extraordinary courage, ingenuity, and determination. As night fell over the palace, the human finally allowed himself a moment of rest. The queen watched him carefully, understanding that his strength had been more than physical. It had been a demonstration of the human spirit. And she knew, without doubt, that when the next challenge came, she could face it with the same courage and determination he had shown. Because when the guards fled, the human stayed. And in that choice, the fate of the palace, and perhaps the entire world, had been secured. The morning after the final battle was calm, almost eerily so. The palace, though battered and scarred, stood firm, a testament to the endurance and ingenuity of those who had defended it. The queen walked through the corridors, noting the broken panels, scorched walls, and shattered doors. Each mark told a story of fear, of courage, and of survival. And at the center of it all, she saw the human checking barricades and traps one last time, ensuring no hidden threat remained. "You should rest," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You have done more than anyone could ask. Your work here is finished." "There is always something more to check," he replied. "The palace, the people, the systems, someone must stay vigilant." That choice had saved her palace, her people, and perhaps even the lives of countless innocents beyond these walls. "You have shown me the strength of your species," she said. "My guards fled, many of my advisors hid, but you stayed. You faced danger, exhaustion, and injury and never wavered. Someone had to protect you. Someone had to hold the line. That is what humans do." The human had taught her that lesson without words, through his actions, through every choice he had made over the past days. She walked beside him, observing the palace in its battered state. "You have changed my understanding of strength," she said. "I had believed that only those trained, enhanced, or bred for combat could hold the line. I was wrong. Strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it comes from the mind, from ingenuity, and from the courage to stand when all others flee. It is about persistence, intelligence, and the willingness to do what is necessary." She understood now that humanity was more than a new species in the galaxy. It was a force capable of extraordinary courage and wisdom. As the day progressed, loyal forces returned to the palace. Reinforcements arrived, astonished to find the attackers defeated and the palace still standing. They were met with the humans' calm vigilance, as if the battle had never ended. The queen addressed them, her voice strong and filled with authority. "This palace stands because one human chose to stay when all others fled. This human's courage has preserved our home and our people." And at the center of it all stood a human, quiet, steadfast, and resolute. The queen approached him once more, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You could ask for anything," she said softly. "We could give you titles, wealth, or command, but I sense you do not seek reward. Protecting those who cannot protect themselves, that is enough." They could change the course of events, shift the balance of power, and redefine what it meant to protect and serve. Over the next days, the queen worked with the human to rebuild the palace and restore order. She observed how he taught others to think critically, to anticipate problems, and to act decisively. His presence inspired not just her, but the returning soldiers, advisors, and citizens. They began to see that strength was not measured by size or weaponry, but by intelligence, courage, and commitment to others. In time, the queen made a proclamation that would resonate across her world and beyond. "Let it be known," she declared, "that one human has preserved this palace, saved my life, and demonstrated a courage that surpasses tradition and expectation. Henceforth, humans shall be recognized as guardians of oaths, protectors who act when fear demands retreat." The human, quiet and unassuming, accepted the honor with modesty. He did not seek power, wealth, or recognition. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that the palace was safe, the queen was protected, and his actions had made a difference. He had faced impossible odds and had remained steadfast, proving that humanity's true power lay not in strength or numbers, but in the choice to act when all others fled. The queen spent time with him, learning more about his species, their history, and their perspective on courage and survival. She discovered that humans had faced countless challenges on their own worlds, that they had endured hardships and wars, and that they had survived by relying on intelligence, creativity, and determination. She realized that these qualities, combined with their willingness to act, made humans exceptional allies and formidable forces in any conflict. As the palace began to recover, the queen reflected on what she had witnessed. Her guards had fled, but one human had stayed. That single choice had preserved her palace, her people, and perhaps even the balance of power in the galaxy. She understood now that humanity's strength was not measured by technology or training alone, but by the courage to face fear, the wisdom to act decisively, and the commitment to protect others. In the days that followed, the human continued his work quietly. He helped train new defenders, guided the rebuilding of defenses, and shared his knowledge with the queen and her advisors. Through his actions, he demonstrated the value of vigilance, strategy, and persistence. And everywhere he went, people watched in awe, learning that true courage was not loud or boastful, but steady, thoughtful, and unwavering. The queen often observed him from a distance, marveling at his dedication. She realized that humanity had earned her trust, not through words or promises, but through action. The choice to stay, to protect, to endure, this was the hallmark of their species. It was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her reign, one that would shape her decisions and her people's understanding of strength. Eventually, the palace fully recovered. The queen stood in the throne room, surveying the restored halls, the new defenses, and the people who had returned to their duties. She knew that none of this would have been possible without the human who had chosen to remain. "You have changed everything," she said to him, her voice filled with gratitude and awe. You have shown me a strength I never knew existed. You have proven that courage and intelligence can overcome even the greatest threats. And for that, humanity will never be forgotten in this world. She knew that wherever humans went in the galaxy, their courage, ingenuity, and willingness to act would leave a mark. And she also knew that her people had witnessed a truth they would never forget. When fear spreads, when chaos reigns, when all others flee, there is a species that stands, unwavering and resolute. And that species is humanity. The story of the palace, the queen, and the human spread quickly across worlds. Tales were told of a lone human who stayed when guards fled, who faced impossible odds, and who turned fear into strategy. He became a symbol not just of courage, but of what it meant to act when all seemed lost. His actions inspired allies, humbled enemies, and reshaped the way civilizations viewed humans. The queen often recalled the moment she first saw him stand alone, barricading the doors and preparing the palace for attack. She remembered her disbelief, followed by awe and finally deep respect. That single choice, the choice to stay, had defined the fate of her people, her palace, and her understanding of strength. And as she looked at him now, quietly supervising the restored defenses, she knew the truth. Humans were not just visitors in the galaxy. They were protectors, thinkers, and survivors. They were capable of extraordinary courage, and their presence would be remembered for generations. Because when the guards fled, the humans stayed. And in that choice, the galaxy witnessed the essence of humanity, the courage to remain, the wisdom to act, and the power to change the course of events. And that was a story no one would ever forget.